You're all being recorded. We will post this on MassDEP's YouTube site. The video that goes up does not have your name or telephone number. So if you want to be anonymous, you can shut your video off and your box won't even appear in the final video. Feel free to do that. Feel free to mute yourself, turn your audio off, be as anonymous as you like. But we would like you to participate. So with that done, we'll switch this again. We're going to talk about, do a couple of things. First, more kind of homework or update. We just posted an update to the COVID-19 waste site cleanup continuity of operations document. We talked about last week a bit, and I just want to bring it up and kind of show you some of the highlights. Here we go, share, there, get the person list. We'll let Eileen in. Eileen, wow. Okay, so go to the top. There it is, you can see that? Large enough, I hope? Is that a yes? Somebody say yes? Okay.
Yes.
I see Matthew shaking his head. Great. Nodding his head. Okay. So as we talked about, we're reacting to and kind of following up on Governor Baker's most recent executive orders, which really kind of recognizes how this is playing out over a longer term than we all initially thought back in March. Larry and I, before most of you arrived, were talking about how in March we were viewing this as a short-term thing and had set up some meetings to end in June or July, and here we are in mid-July and they're still going on. So things are being adjusted, and as we open up and going through the phases, we recognize that more and more we're able to do work and finding ways to cope with this while still taking measures to be protective. So it's a balance, but we're moving towards I don't even want to use the terms more normal operations, but we're getting things done. So we're reacting and adjusting our guidance consistent with those executive orders. The little note 2 there kind of emphasizes that the old executive orders tied the resumption of normal deadlines, permit deadlines and things like that, or license expiration deadlines, to the end of the state of emergency. What we're finding is the state of emergency is going to go on for a long time, but we are going to get better at dealing with it and continue to do work during the state of emergency. So the new orders acknowledge that we are going to return to more normal operations before the end of that state of emergency. So we have to adjust for that, rather than tying all kind of resumption of work to the end of that state of emergency. We have to find ways to continue within the state of emergency. So the first kind of sections in this had talked about, and we're restating that things like IRAs and notifications, none of that stopped. All of that work continued. We wanted to deal with imminent hazards, time critical functions. So those actions kind of continued on and will continue as normal. What we had talked about before in the previous guidance was that there would be, and we recognize that some deadlines, kind of the more typical routine deadlines, might run into problems, and we were urging people to take a very cautious approach with COVID, and we would acknowledge and recognize that if deadlines are missed because of the requirements of COVID protections, that that's okay, we'll deal with it. We already had notices of delays and a mechanism for dealing with such things, and we urge people to kind of use that existing mechanism for that. Now we're shifting that balance back to as we get deeper into the phased reopenings and we're able to do more and more work, we are shifting the expectations to assume that people will meet their deadlines and that the material documents will be submitted in a timely manner. So we're looking for new deadlines coming up. We expect and hope people to meet those deadlines. And for those people who had submitted notices of delays, we would expect them to kind of resume that work and move towards submitting those delayed reports or documents, whatever was supposed to be coming in, and kind of get back on track. So there are, last week when we talked, there were 40 notices of delays submitted. That's gone up a few in the last week, but it's still a very reasonable, manageable number. So we've asked the regional staff to contact the people that submitted those notices of delays, kind of letting them know of this kind of change in guidance and kind of confirming that we expect them to kind of start working towards returning to compliance. And since part of the notice of delay process was for people to submit a schedule for returning to compliance once at that point, the state of emergency had been lifted. Now what we're saying is that at this point of time, much like the executive orders coming from the governor, rather than wait for the end of the state of emergency, that resumption of normal operations should start now. And there would be obviously some period of time where people need time to do the work and get the materials submitted. So we're not expecting that work to be submitted tomorrow, but that work should resume to achieve kind of the return to the normal timelines. Let's see, towards the end, and I can't stress this enough, that this is guidance that we hope will cover the vast majority of the cases. What we found is most people were still, in fact, meeting all of their applicable deadlines. It was a couple handfuls of sites that submitted the notices of delay. And as people are able to do more and more work, that they should meet the deadlines. But we also recognize that there are going to be unique circumstances on a site-by-site basis where COVID is still going to be a problem, and that work might not be able to resume as normal. And we recognize that and acknowledge that, and we would urge you to contact your regional office and talk about the situation. And we can be, we can be flexible. We do not want to send people, make people submit, work to submit things under the MCP if it poses or creates a situation that would pose a risk either to the workers or to the people living or working on the site. That's not the intention. So we acknowledge that there are unique circumstances that are going to be out there that we can't foresee, and this is a catch-all to make sure that you and the regional staff have an opportunity to work together on those as we move into the future. So, any questions about that? Stop the share. There we go, so I can see you all better. Any? You do all have audio, right? You can unmute yourselves if you like. It's a very quiet group today. It makes me nervous. So that paperwork aside, the big item that we did want to talk about today, that sent out an email to the advisory committee members, and thank you for joining us. We've been having a lot of fun on these weekly meetings. If you haven't had a chance to participate, as kind of in reaction to kind of what we see happening across the country with the Black Lives Matter movement and kind of a national re-examining of kind of how kind of institutional racism or kind of works its way into the systems and exists and has effects on, obviously in the media, we see it a lot, and the focus has been on law enforcement and the structural, structural things in the way the system is set up that works to perpetuate inequality. It's appropriate for DEP and EEA, it's secretary-wide. We've kind of started work to talk both internally, we want to talk externally, examining how we go about our jobs and how, whether there are any changes or ways that we can do our work to better serve the citizens of the Commonwealth kind of across the board and be more representative, be more open to different ideas, different voices, and make sure that in this context today, make sure that we're not listening to the same voices that we always have, so that people that have different experiences and have different perspectives have an opportunity to express them, to participate in the functioning of state government, and for us, for environmental protection. And it's an opportunity to really expand kind of who we hear, what we listen to, and eventually kind of internally in hiring processes, have people within DEP as well as the external groups we talk about, be more representative of the people that we're trying to serve. So one of the things that we hope to do is look at all the advisory committees that DEP routinely works with, and ask the questions of, is it sufficiently representative? And my first answer to that would be probably not. And how can we engage more people, reach out to people, invite them, and make it easier for them to participate, make people comfortable that they're welcome and that their voices can and should be heard. And for us, for the Wayside Cleanup Advisory Committee is what we're talking about now, but we're doing this in all of the DEP programs and EEA wide as well. So all of which to say is, I'll give you my personal take on kind of where we stand. I look at you guys, the advisory committee, and the associated, all of the people that participate. And one thing that I've always, I felt strongly about, and I think, and it goes back before me, it's not me, but I appreciate that going back to the Jim Coleman and Sarah Weinstein days, the early days of this, our group has never been limited to just the 12 or 14 people that are actually sitting at the table, that we have tried to be inclusive and make sure that the people sitting in the audience also participate as well, and not have a big distinction between the people sitting at the table and the people in the audience. That said, there's not a big difference between the people sitting at the table and the audience in terms of diversity and representativeness. But I think it helps to be that. We've taken steps to try to broaden accessibility of our meetings by going online and live streaming it, so that people that can't make it into Boston in the middle of the day would have an opportunity to participate as well. But I look at the people that have participated over the last 20 years, and it's consistently admittedly interested parties, our PRPs, they're consultants, they're lawyers, and far less of the environmental communities affected by our 21E sites. And back early in the process, and some of you have been doing this longer than I have, but many of us go back a long time. And you remember back in the early 1990s when the program was being redesigned, there was at least interest and a lot more participation by activist groups, by advocacy groups, kind of the environmental, more of the what we'd consider the environmentalists. Not that we're not environmentalists. I know we all are, but and as we've revised the MCP and we've created a system that, knock on wood, has been working fairly well, then very kind of rightly and understandably, the interests of the environmental groups have shifted and have gone to other seemingly more pressing issues, more time critical issues, rather than the wayside cleanup. So while I understand why there's less emphasis on our program, because I hope this is the reason, because there haven't been any crises that would draw people's attention, I would be interested in ways of kind of encouraging more participation, of opening it up without there being a crisis to draw people in. So with that, I would welcome your thoughts, get you guys talking. How do you view our program and the outreach that we do, and particularly, are there ways where we can draw more people in, with particularly people with diverse interests, that would kind of add different voices to our community and our group, and kind of maybe not necessarily put new life into the program, but bring different perspectives and different ideas and perhaps different ways of doing things. Your turn.
Paul, so
yes.
I've been thinking about this a lot over the past week, and tried to make a little bit of outreach. And it does seem like our discussions in the Wayside Cleanup Advisory Committee are often arcane. They're somewhat off-putting to people who maybe are in a community environmental group. It's a sort of, it's hard to understand and know what's going on and participate. And so I had thought of an idea. It is just my idea. I see several representatives of the LSP Association and their board, and I certainly want to clarify that this is not an LSPA thing, but it occurred to me that possibly there was an opportunity here for both the department and the LSPA to reach out to those community people groups and improve the communication and also improve the education of, what is the MCP? What is it doing? What might be happening in your neighborhood? How could you find out? Who are these LSPs? Never heard of them before. So my thought was that it might not be too big an ask or too heavy a lift, however you want to say it, for particularly LSPs, but people who regularly attend the Wayside Cleanup Advisory Committee who might want to volunteer to be matched up, if you will, with a community environmental group, and would be willing to not necessarily represent them, but to act as a conduit to let them know what's going on in the advisory committee, be able to maybe gather questions or views or concerns they had and bring them to the advisory committee on a very ad hoc basis. I was thinking, in my own case, I'm probably going to be there anyway. So, and I'm not like volunteering to do all their LSP work, but I would be willing to, meet with them, especially in our new environment over Zoom or something. It wouldn't necessarily have to be somebody in my geographic locale, which is good because I live in Rhode Island. and I'm currently in Delaware. But it would be an opportunity to help explain to people, why this, what this is all about, and also hear their concerns and be able to bring them to the committee. So it was just thought that there could be like a LSPA DEP matchmaker where you could reach out to groups or groups that contact the department wanting to know more about things, could offer them and say, hey, they're this pool. We could match you up with someone, perhaps a volunteer who'd be willing to help you with this. Broad thought.
Okay. Jeff Porter had indicated, Jeff, would you like to?
Good morning, everyone. I have a few thoughts. First of all, Paul, I think it's a great idea. I also agree with Matt that we probably have to rethink the content of at least some meetings of the advisory committee in connection with that wider goal, because, for example, how standards are being set and reset is maybe not of general interest to the broader audience you want to attract. But I would encourage a few conversations with other people in state government. More specifically, former Commissioner Liss at Mass Development.
Mm-hmm.
I think you all may know that the Brownfield Bill in 1996 established a Brownfield Advisory Committee that sits within Mass Development, because Mass Development provides the funds that are authorized by that statute. And that committee, having had the honor of chairing that committee at one time, that committee looks more like the group that you're talking about and less like a lot of LSPs and lawyers. So back when I was on the Mass Development Board, I tried to explore from the Mass Development side why there wasn't a tighter relationship between that group and this group. But it's something you might read. That was a prior administration, so that's something you might revisit with Lauren. I honestly don't even know who's chairing that group these days. The other person I'd encourage you to talk to is Kim Tillis at EEA, who directs the Massachusetts Environmental Trust. Hopefully most of you know that there's a Massachusetts Environmental Trust that takes the money, the revenue from whale, trout, bass, and mill license plates, and awards those funds mostly to grassroots environmental groups. And so Kim, because these organizations are annually making grant applications to MET, is well connected to the full network of community environmental organizations around the Commonwealth, and could maybe help do some outreach to those, to the organizations that are particularly concerned about site cleanup. So those are the two thoughts that I think it's a great idea, and those are the thoughts I had on implementation. Of course, I'd be willing to help with either of those things if it would indeed be helpful. And of course, all of this is premised on your outlandish suggestion that this group can't adequately represent the views of everybody in the Commonwealth. Larry and I are just accepting that as a given. We're not questioning.
Shocked. No, I think everybody does a really good job. I mean, I look forward to our advisory committee meetings. I think that it's engaging, interesting. It's periodically challenging, and people do. In theory, everybody on the advisory committee is supposed to be representing some interest, but in practice, my impression is that people do a pretty good job of kind of expressing a wide range of interests. But that's different from actually having lived and being in the position of living near on a hazardous waste site. I can imagine, I try to imagine what it would be like, but I have not kind of gone through that. I don't live, and this is just one example of an interest that is rarely kind of heard in our groups. of the people that are directly affected. I mean, one thing that struck me earlier in the year, or was it last year? God, time is, it was last year actually, when we were doing the MCP changes. And at one of the meetings that we had, some folks from from Weymouth that live next to the compressor site came to partly to learn about the changes and to kind of provide some comments and get some background. And it was great to have that perspective. And it was also great, and I kind of applaud the advisory committee and a lot of people in the audience stayed after the meeting, and we probably had another half hour, 45 minutes of discussions about how the program works and kind of what it meant for that particular site. And it was a great back and forth with several people representing a perspective that we rarely get at those meetings. And it was refreshing, and it was challenging, and they were saying some things that were uncomfortable and different. But that, this shouldn't necessarily be easy all the time. So yeah, those are great. It does strike me that, Jeff, that the examples that you use, the Brownfields Advisory Committee and the Environmental Trust, are, both, it should be said, have money involved, which probably makes it easier to attract attention, because it is, there is more of a purpose there, which leads me to a couple things that we're going to bring up. One is, we talked earlier, several months ago, about restarting the technical assistance grants for communities, and we are in the process of doing that. We're also going to be starting a grant program for the MOSPRA, Massachusetts Oil Spill Prevention and Response Act program, kind of our, something Wayside Cleanup also implements. And part of that will be targeting environmental justice communities with those grants as well. So those are kind of other tools that we'll be working on to kind of help, in this effort. Anybody else want to provide some thoughts, comments, suggestions?
Susan has her hand up.
I'll speak up because I had my hand up, Paul.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm.
That's okay. I had my virtual hand up as well as my actual hand up. Yeah. I just want to mention a few things. One, I've always thought it was not quite right that the Bureau of Wayside Cleanup Advisory Committee, including myself, are kind of on it for life, except for the LSPA president who rotates, so that we get new voices from the LSPA. I just don't think that's right. I think there should be terms. I think we really should advocate for who we're supposed to represent. I mean, my hat on the advisory committee is public interest. I do try to advocate for that. I can, in a way, as the chair of the Arlington Conservation Commission, but I can't in terms of like EJ communities, et cetera, except for, certain specific issues that I really understand. For example, the TCE issue, which I was a bit of a bulldog about. So one idea I have is that we really should have term limits, and we really should be consistently advocating for whatever group we're representing. The second is, maybe we should look at what the makeup of the committee is and who we're supposed to be representing, and try to pull in some other groups that are not represented, some environmental groups, some groups from student groups who, from green teams in a high school or their advisors or in a college. We should try to be getting younger people. Most of us are of a certain age, and we should try to get younger people engaged in this. I think we have two hot topics in the Bureau of Wayside Cleanup that require discussions and guidance that can really engage the community. One is PFAS, as we know. We've had great public meetings on PFAS that were, aligned with the Bureau of Wayside Cleanup, but not, that was for setting drinking water standards, et cetera. But there was a lot of public interest, a lot of articulate young people who spoke, as well as people we don't usually get at our meetings. The other issue I think that's going to garner a lot of interest is climate change and how we are going to implement guidance around climate change, resilience, and adaptation, not just in our remedial activities as we've already done, but in the broader sense of what our new guidance is coming up against. I know that Ken is working on that. But I think those two issues can really capture more public interest. And if we open up our committee and try to change over, I mean, I'd be happy to step down if somebody was available who could do this, who was energetic and young and in the communities, or, and really interested in doing this. I'd be happy to step down. So those are my thoughts on where to go and how to do it.
Thank you. One thing, Liz, do we have a list of the advisory committee members on the website, right? Do you know if it lists kind of who they represent, kind of the slots that they're in?
I believe it does.
Okay.
If that list doesn't, we have a prior list that does. I mean, that is one of the things that we discussed internally, is that we've kind of moved away from even knowing who is sitting in what seat in terms of who they represent. So that's become de-emphasized over time.
So one thing you all might want to think about, and we'd be interested in getting kind of feedback on, is kind of following Susan's thoughts, kind of what kind of would these seats be? Kind of if you were to start over again and set up an advisory committee that would be representative of different viewpoints, forget what exists now, but what do you think it could be or should be structured like? So think about that, and emails to us along those lines. And then the time limits are something that certainly we've been thinking about as well.
I have to disagree with my dear friend Susan on one issue, which is the advocacy piece. I think when you were doing your opening remarks, I think you pointed out the fact that even though we're on the board as representatives of certain interest groups, basically, we tend to look at the committee. We tend to look at things holistically and not take firm lines in terms of what would most favor the people that are in the organizations or the entities behind us. And I think that's worked out very well. And I'd hate to see the committee go to a point where everybody is strongly advocating, with blinders on for their particular group or the particular organization that they represent. I don't think that'll work as well as what we have now. I think it's good that we come from different backgrounds, have different perspectives. I saw the same thing on the LSP board back when I was on that. And it's good to have the different perspectives, but in the end, you're looking at what makes sense for the common good.
Oh, I agree, Larry. I'm sorry if I didn't make that clear. I meant that I, as representing the public interest, don't know that I'm representing it well enough, that I'm not plugged in to the EJ community. I'm not plugged in to the people living next to a flood zone in Boston who are concerned about flooding every time we get an extreme weather event. I'm not, that's what I meant, is that not that we should all just advocate for our little sections, but that do we really represent them? And I do appreciate that we all work well together and that we listen to each other. I think that's really important. I think that this committee actually works very well in a lot of respects. We get policy changes, we get guidance done, we listen to each other. We do get things done in the Commonwealth. We assist DEP getting things done in the Commonwealth. But what I'm saying is I personally don't know that I'm representing the public interest well enough, whatever that means. So that's what I meant. Yeah.
I think what you're proposing, Paul, is there might be more representation than just one committee member representing the entire public interest.
Well, yeah, I mean, ideally, you know, what I would like a year from now is not to have kind of, you know, people that are strictly representing, you know, the oil industry and strictly representing kind of the legal aspects of things, or strictly representing EJ communities, because it, you know, it is good to have people working like we do, a group of peers that are discussing issues and kind of working to make the program kind of work for everybody. But recognizing that, you know, I can try to kind of think what kind of an environmental advocate might say or might want. I can try to put myself in the place of somebody who's living on a hazardous waste site, but it's not the same thing as having somebody there who actually is living that experience. And you know, there are well, I was going to say there are limitations to how big the table can be, but in this, you know, Zoom age, I guess there isn't. And it's not that like I would remove anybody in particular, although the term limits are probably a good idea, but it really is adding those other voices and having the same informed, interesting, challenging, productive discussions with additional people that bring different perspectives that we currently don't have. So it is, you know, replacing or substituting as much as expanding the tent. And sometimes that may mean, you know, having meetings at a different time so that people can participate when it's not in workday. You know, having it online is a, you know, one of the silver linings of the COVID cloud is that, you know, these meetings are kind of more accessible. Kind of getting, Matt, to kind of where you started in kind of doing outreach, you know, the LSPs and DEP kind of trying to get, or for whatever, there are many reasons why we would want to do this, but meeting with community groups or local groups more frequently in different contexts, I think certainly would generate more interest, and it would help us identify people who are interested in this and who would want to participate more deeply. And Zoom makes that happen. I mean, I probably have been to more public meetings for site-specific issues in the last couple of months than I normally would, because it's not, you know, driving out to someplace in, you know, central Massachusetts and then having to come home at 10 o'clock at night after the public meeting. I can do it from my lovely basement. So, you know, these kinds of meetings are great opportunities to do that outreach as well. Next, who are...
Hi, it's Michelle.
Hey, Michelle. Michelle Paul, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you? I think we might be. I think it's a great idea to kind of get the word out, and I think that we should be getting the word out about advisory committee meetings and trying to get more people to watch and participate as much as they want to. I don't want to water down the technical discussions that we have, but maybe there's an opportunity for something that is that augments that. Maybe there's an opportunity, instead of like these office hours that we're having, maybe there are community office hours where especially when people are listening to the advisory committee meeting and maybe want some clarification, and they may not speak up during an advisory committee meeting because it is so technical, that might be an opportunity to kind of have the office hours and be able to have the community really ask the questions in another format, and maybe a format that they feel more comfortable in. So I think it's kind of a, you could do kind of a twofold thing. Ask LSPs and folks in the regional offices, they know who the community groups are, to get the word out about these advisory committee meetings. And then also have maybe a follow-up, maybe a week after the advisory committee meetings, have a follow-up community office hour where if there was anything that was unclear, or if there was something that somebody didn't want to really ask the question, because I mean, our agendas are pretty full. We don't usually get done a lot before, before the planned time. So, I just fear that we would end up off on a tangent, or people just wouldn't ask the questions that they wanted to ask in an advisory committee setting.
Mm-hmm. So how about flipping that? Rather than kind of having a community session after the advisory committee meeting, what if you were to flip it? So Michelle, you're in New Bedford. Gerard, did I see Gerard here? I don't have that gallery view on yet. So say we were to go to like a municipal official, we have one handy, Michelle, or a local advocacy group, and ask them, or said that DEP would be available to answer questions about waste sites or in New Bedford in general. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily for a particular site, although that could be done as well. That's a different thing. But just as the community, an opportunity to talk about hazardous waste sites and what they mean and kind of how they're addressed in New Bedford, and then so have a 2-hour open session. People could ask questions. Many of the questions we would say, well, that's kind of site specific. We'd have to get back to you, but we could do a brief presentation on how the program works, and then open it up, and then feed that into the advisory committee meetings. That if you want to participate, we'd love to have you. Here are weekly office hours. We have periodic advisory committee meetings. You're more than welcome to attend. So kind of have it go in that direction.
Yeah, I think that would work.
And I think that's kind of similar to what Matt was talking about earlier. Mm-hmm. Kind of, but
I guess I was trying to Michelle's point. I would agree with her that there are a lot of highly technical and regulatory questions that we want to discuss at the advisory committee meeting, but it would be like to Mr. Rogers and Mr. Porter, it would be like me trying to go into court and understand what was going on. I would have no idea because it's just not my area. But if it was important to me or something, I might be able to have someone like Mr. Porter or Mr. Rogers explain it to me in words I could understand. Well, I think it's important. I mean, and so I think having, being able to offer some assistance to people, because it is daunting. I mean, Michelle, we've had the discussions, right? And in the LSPA, why can't we get more younger members to come to meeting? And I talked to a bunch of younger people who worked for firms that I worked with and stuff, and they were like, I came to one meeting, oh my gosh, nobody talked to me. They all talked to their friends. And besides, I have no idea what you're talking about in that meeting, and I never went again. It's like it was arcane. And
those are people in the business.
Have been made in the emerging professionals, young professionals. We've got a group, and we've sort of fixed that problem, but it did require some sort of bridge advocacy, mentoring, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. I actually did. I went to one of our neighborhood groups has started to meet outside. So I've gone to 2 meetings down in the South End. We actually meet on a brownfield site in a community garden and socially distanced. And there definitely are opportunities to get out and talk to the community even now. and to get their concerns, to bring them back, and for committee members to provide that feedback, or anybody in any community to let us know, and to be able to bring that feedback back to the advisory committee.
Okay. All right. Anybody else? Thoughts, options?
Come on, Gerard.
What?
Oh, there's Gerard. DEP staff have other venues for talking about this as well. But Gerard, would you be willing and available if like Michelle arranged something like that?
Oh, absolutely. And we've done that. I've gone down on a number of buddies meetings, even some that were site specific, but some that were just general topics. I did a thing for him on vapor intrusion and tried to explain that whole thing. So actually, I've been in New Bedford quite a bit doing very similar things.
Yeah, I mean, we to that point, the regional staff obviously do a lot of outreach and a lot of community involvement. So it often is, community by community or site by site. So what we're trying to do is kind of try to find a way that feeds into kind of the bigger advisory committee meeting, because all of that is great for kind of the site operations and keep people informed, and people have a reason to want to be involved and want to participate and come to the meetings. As it kind of gets further and further away from a specific site and more to the bigger policy issues, that's where I think we lose the interest or the attention of a lot of the environmental groups, of the local community groups, the advocacy groups, that it would be useful to have participate. So for a given site, we can get a lot of input. People get, we have their interest, but it's, once you get into the more abstract and more technical policy aspects and regulatory aspects, that that appeals to me. Obviously, I find that fascinating, but we do need to find ways to make other community interests kind of more welcome and more comfortable participating in those.
So maybe what we have to do is invite them. I mean,
yeah, well, that was one of my questions.
We have this outreach. Gerard's done it. Michelle's done it. I've done it on a very small scale in Arlington.
Yeah.
So maybe what we have to do is, when these policy issues come up in the Bureau of Wayside Cleanup, or we schedule them to come up, PFAS, climate change, just cleanup in general, that we bring this representative from this community group in and talk to us for 10 minutes. It doesn't matter that they're not technical. What we want to hear is what their concerns are. And then we're the ones who are supposed to interpret those and make them good policy and guidance for the Commonwealth. I mean, we're hopefully the experts with DEP, but we need to hear their concerns. So maybe we need to bring them in because they don't feel comfortable.
I think that's a good point. I mean, we do have, there's no reason we should be kind of waiting for people to come to us, or, for a particular topic. I think we can approach you guys and approach others to kind of in turn go, and if we have something, PFAS being kind of an easy, obvious one, but it has been good. We've met with a lot of community groups that are interested in PFAS, and one of the other things we've been talking about is, obviously we do a lot of outreach and work with the LSPA, with NIOP, with EBC, and what had been lacking, but for the PFAS drinking water regs, we did similar, the sessions that we do for EBC, say on PFAS, we did a similar, meeting with environmental groups brought together by the Conservation Law Foundation in a similar context and did the same presentation that we would normally do to EBC to them. And so it's going out and kind of seeking that input and making sure that kind of we ask for people to participate. So it's for PFAS, if we're going to have that on the agenda of an advisory committee meeting, maybe we do need to go out of our way and specifically ask for somebody to come, not to commit for 3 years for a term sitting at the table, but would you be interested in coming and giving your perspective for this particular topic?
Open mic.
Mhm.
Open mic night type.
Well, that's, keeping in mind that advisory committee meetings have a limited period of time and we do want to accomplish something in them. But having, a person invited to come and participate in that meeting for that topic, I think would be, and then, certainly trying to make them welcome so that they come back for other topics, but having that invitation for something that they would feel comfortable speaking about and that, they have a unique perspective. Maybe that's one way of kind of getting people in the door and introducing them in a way that kind of is welcoming and comfortable. And then maybe we can then keep them, for other things.
Well,
Hey, Paul.
I think
Go ahead.
inviting them certainly a good idea, but you're still going to run into that, walking into a room where everybody's talking about something that you just don't really understand. So I think part of the invitation would be maybe sitting down with them, like in Michelle's group, or hey, we've got this issue coming up. We're going to talk about it at this meeting. This is a little bit of the background, so you can take a little bit of the edge off through the invitation by having a little bit of one-on-one with the person or the group before they come to the meeting, so they don't feel overwhelmed when they walk into the Zoom meeting.
Well, certainly, but I think if you're talking about, say, PFAS again, I think I could find, given all the meetings that I've been to, people from community groups that have different perspectives that would feel very comfortable coming and speaking about that topic. It's when you expect that person to also feel comfortable talking about activity and use limitations, that you lose them, that is overwhelming. It's more out of their sight. But there are a lot of people out there that have interest and knowledge about PFAS that it would be, you could pick. And we could probably find people to come and talk about land use. They might not be, if we had AULs on the table, they might not be experts in real estate law. And who is? Come on, raise your hands. Come on. But they might be, comfortable in their knowledge and opinions about a particular property and how it may or may not be used in the future, and would be willing to come and talk about that, and then get them in the door, and then we might be able to keep them for PFAS. So I think that being more proactive and seeking out people for specific topics is another way, maybe in addition to going out and seeking out people to sit at the advisory committee and kind of accept the whole overwhelming mess all at once.
Hey, Paul, this is Marilyn. I have a question, or sort of a practical question. So, in the example, the New Bedford environmental activist groups have been long established for quite some time and are very vocal. But is there, if we're trying to outreach voices that we don't hear from, is there a community relations, function or group or whatever that has, identifies the environmental justice communities in Massachusetts and what environmental groups are active within those communities, so you have an idea of who to send those invitations to? Because otherwise you're just relying on who this group may know, or who people have run into on specific site issues that think they might want to participate in a broader discussion.
We do have an environmental justice group within MassDEP and also EEA. There's an environmental justice lead up there. And we have list of contacts in the different community groups. So we have gathered that information, and we use that when we're working on sites in a community to kind of identify who's nearby that we should reach out to. So that does exist. It's always changing, but we do have that.
Okay, it's almost 10 o'clock. Any other thoughts before we sign off for now? This has, as always, this has been interesting and fun, and I think there are some ideas that have come out from it. I think the video obviously will be up on YouTube. Please share it around for people that may also have some interest but weren't able to attend, and any comments or suggestions can be sent to who should we send it to? Paul.Locke, LOCKE @mass.gov, or BWSC.information@mass.gov, and maybe we'll put a summary of this up on the web, some thoughts, and please contribute thoughts and ideas as well. And then we'll see what changes we might be able to make. But also for those of you that do know of interest groups, community groups, within a community or centered around a site, any kind of binding thing, something that binds them together. If you would be interested in having DEP staff come and basically give a waste site cleanup 101 overview, and then take field general questions about kind of the cleanup process, we'd be more than happy to do that. And I think it would be interesting to try a few and see. So offer that around as well.
Yeah, I'm going to get the word out in New Bedford, so careful what you wish for.
Yeah, New Bedford. pick a tough one first. Yeah. No, but I think Gerard's smiling, so I take that to mean that he would join me, or I would join him, and do it. So we'll
Only
be back.
if we can get those yummy cohogs from New Bedford Harbor as a snack.
From New Bedford Harbor?
The
Maybe
PCB ones, they have extra flavor.
Yes.
exactly.
And you don't get hungry for a long, long time.
The je ne sais quoi.
They won't catch on fire.
Yeah. And if they do, there's always some extra AFFF to spread over.
Yeah. Yeah. Little sauce.
Don't
Okay,
be
on that note,
don't be dissing on my home there.
New Bedford cohogs with a chaser of AFFF. Okay, we'll see you next week, 9 o'clock. And feel free to spread the invitation to as many people as possible. And we'll talk to you then. Thanks for coming. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Paul.